Hey, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be installing some new brake pads. If you haven't checked out the previous video, I had swapped wheels to the SuperSpeed. Oh my god, I've been sick for a while. I swapped to some white wheels from SuperSpeed, the R6, double R06. I love how they came out. I love how they turned out, but with anything white wheel related, there's gonna be an issue with keeping them clean. And you know, I've been doing a good job. I had them, say it's a good job, but I had them ceramic coated. I've been using detailing products from, you know, chemical guys. For the Hyundai N brakes, it's well known that they are pretty dust heavy. They're great pads, but the brake dust, pretty abundant. I'm going to be going with the EBC Red Stuff is what they're called. These are for, you know, sort of an OEM. I wouldn't say they're track ready. They even say on the site that these Red Stuff ones are not track adjacent. Since I'm going to not be tracking for a bit and I'm gonna be running the white wheels on the street, I wanted to have something that is a little bit more lower maintenance to maintain. So I've been hearing good stuff about EBC brakes in general. So trying out the Red Stuff to see if this can reduce some of the dust. So pretty straightforward. Haven't replaced pads on the car yet. I've done 2 track days with them and been driving it for a while. It's been held up pretty well. Again, if I were gonna track, I might put the old pads if there's enough wear on there. Or EBC also makes track specific ones. They're like the EBC yellow or blue pads that are more track adjacent. So with these are sort of, again, like I said, more OEM plus-ish or OEM-ish. Also the in-bed process, there is no sort of bedding process for these. Typically a bedding process from what I know is you speed up and then you brake really fast or really hard, but then not to a complete stop. So there's none of that for these. The bedding process, they say from EBC, is to just run them normally. Nothing extreme in terms of extreme braking unless you really want, unless you really need to. I'm not trying to, you know, crash or cause an accident, but they say just normal driving will be enough to bed these. So hopefully nobody around here is crazy in terms of driving. Well, we'll see, knock on wood. I bought the both front and rear. So I got these from buybrake.com, and they're an online distributor, or I guess distributor of a lot of brake products, and they had these in stock for the Kona N. Awesome customer support. They kept me updated through text with a live person. It wasn't just like automated text. And yeah, can't say enough. First time I ordered from buybrakes.com. Again, they're not, you know, sponsoring me in any way, or neither is EBC. So we're gonna test these out and give our honest review, because that's what we do around here. Unless they want to sponsor me, you know what I'm saying? Hit me up, EBC. But yeah, like I said, I will drop a link in the description below where I bought these pads and the specific part number for these. And yeah, going to head to my brother's house like I always do, because I live in an apartment garage and it's the worst to work on, but also don't have a lot of tools. So going to look to install these. So stay tuned. Low dust. Get a cold start here.
So in an effort to be as detailed as possible, I'll try my best to present an install process. For the front pads, here are the tools that I used. A 14mm wrench or socket for the 2 caliper bolts, some ceramic brake lubricant for the outside of the pads, a caliper compression tool, and last but not least, some Loctite for the bolts. So here's how the brake assembly looks with the wheel off. These are the 2 bolts, one at the bottom and one at the top here. I started by cleaning as much brake dust as possible and then started to remove the 2 14mm bolts at the top and bottom. Next, you'll want to remove the caliper, but don't let it hang off the brake line as it could cause damage. So I placed it here at the top, but I've seen people also zip tie these to the springs. Here you can now remove the brake pad retainers and pads. The retainers are on the front of the pads and they look sort of like giant paper clips to me. The pads were a little stuck also, so I used a plastic trim remover to help loosen it out. On the new pads, I applied the brake lubricant. This is a sliding moving part, so you'll want this lubricated to help reduce noise, but also keep it running as smooth as possible. I also made sure to get the back and top part of the pads, but don't put them on the brake pad material itself. Also, the pads came with their own backing plate, so I didn't reuse the OEM ones. Now you can insert the new pads. There's a metal clip that sort of guides it in place, but it could be a little tricky to position them. I made sure the bottoms were in place first, then push the top in, but you might have to finagle it a bit. And make sure you repeat this process on the inner pad. Here I am applying the brake lubricant and then wiggling in place. Make sure they're secure and not loose, and then you'll basically go in reverse order to finish up. First, by putting back the pad retainer clips, or giant paper clips as I like to call them. Here, you'll use your caliper compression tool. It took me a bit to figure out how to use it at first, but that might be because I'm dumb. But definitely make sure that the piston is compressed all the way, or else the housing won't be able to fit back on, which you'll find out was my issue for the rears. Next, you can put back the caliper. I used one of the bolts and inserted it at the top loosely to help position the assembly, then inserted the bottom bolt. Next, you'll want to tighten them down. I don't have the exact torque specs, so I just made sure that they're hand tight. Based off loosening the bolts at the beginning though, they shouldn't be too over torqued, but tightened enough to feel secure, so I had my brother check it once over.
Alright, let's clean these guys so we can kind of get a sense of how much dust.
Here I started to try installing the rear pads, but I found out there were a few extra different pieces that I wasn't aware of, and dad duty was calling, so I had to run and did not finish installing the rear pads that day, unfortunately.
Alright, let's try this again. Gonna go back to my brother's house and finish the rears. As you can see, hella dirty.
So here's the rear wheel after 4 weeks since I last washed them, including one long 200 total mile road trip. And this time I came a little bit more prepared, so you'll still need the tools used for the front pads. This time though, you'll need a 12mm wrench or socket. I actually brought gloves this time to keep my hands cleaner, and some pliers last but not least. Here's how the e-brake assembly looks. First, you'll want to remove this clip or bracket here. Next, you're going to want to take your 12mm and remove this nut here. That'll allow you to remove the e-brake line at the top and the spring at the bottom, as well as the bracket itself. Once those are off, you could take your 14 mil to remove the bolts here on the caliper to remove it to have access to get the pads out. Here you want to remove the caliper, but again, don't let it hang from the brake line as it could cause damage. Once you have that done, install is similar to the front pads. Here you want to remove the pad retainers and the pads themselves. Next, you'll apply your brake lube on the backing of the brake pads as well as the top and bottom, but make sure you don't get them on the pad material. Now, you can take your new pads and insert them, and then make sure you repeat the same process of lubrication on the other pad. And again, make sure the brake lubricant doesn't touch the pad material or the rotor itself. Once that's set, you can install the pad retainers, and then make sure to compress your brake caliper and then reassemble the brake caliper onto the brakes. You'll see in the next clip, I had issues putting the caliper on. That was because the caliper was not compressed all the way.
Alright, finally got it in. I just had to make sure that the brake was compressed all the way. It was not. So I got this bolt to help push in the caliper piston so that it compresses all the way. So now it fits. I was having trouble putting the two bolts here in here, but now it fits. So we got to put this thing with the spring back in. Here's the spring. Just hopefully that goes in and we'll wrap up.
Here you want to pull the e-brake line through the metal bracket here. You want to have the e-brake down so that you can pull the line all the way through. Again, make sure that your car is secure on the jack stands. Here you want to pull the e-brake line on the bracket here, and you want to make sure that this is firm and not loose before you secure the 12mm nut here. Once that's tightened down, you want to take your spring and make sure that it's secure on the bracket using your pliers. And then lastly, don't forget to put this clip on the e-brake line assembly. Once you have all your brakes assembled, you want to go in and pump your brakes around 3 to 5 times just to make sure that there's pressure in the pedal. After that, it might feel a little stiff, but once you turn the car on, it should feel normal. And if it doesn't, then you might need to bleed your brakes. Alright, just got done with the install. Oh man, the front, we're okay. I did it that one day, but I ran out of time when I was trying to do the rear. The rear, man, it wasn't that it was hard, it's that there's a few extra sort of steps that I didn't know about. I mean, it works. We'll see. I'm about to make it home, so if I don't make it home and I crash, then they haven't worked. So fingers crossed, but so far everything's working fine. About to get off the freeway here. Stay tuned. Alright, well, brakes have been installed and wanted to give some final thoughts. You saw my previous clips. Probably should have did a little bit more research before installing the rears. The fronts were pretty straightforward, but the rear did have the e-brake assembly and a few parts that I wasn't expecting. One, just make sure your caliper is also compressed all the way. Two was the e-brake section where there's a spring, and if your e-brake's on, you won't be able to pull it through the assembly to put it back together. So that threw me off a little bit, but you know, I'm not a mechanic. I'm just going off of what I've read online, trying to learn as much as possible with this platform as time goes on. But I am pretty happy with the install and being able to change my own brake pads now. In terms of the brake dust, for testing, I did take a road trip that was 200 total miles, and this is how the wheels started out. I didn't do the best job in cleaning, but here is the rear after being wiped down, and here is the front, how it started before the road trip. Here's what they look like on the rears after 100 miles, both freeway and city driving. A little bit more dustier for sure, but not by that much. Here's a comparison of the front wheels. The wheels wiped down on the left, and after 100 miles of freeway and city driving on the right. So the fronts will definitely be much dustier in regards to obviously the car's front wheel drive and the bigger brakes are on the front. but not too dusty compared to, say, the OEM pads driving the same distance. Here's what the rears look like after 100 miles versus 200 miles when I made my way back home. As you can see, obviously more dust, but nothing that is unmanageable. You can see the crevices where dust gets trapped is still abundant, as well as the inner barrel, but not as much as the OEM pads would be in my opinion. But again, this is only after 200 miles. The fronts now are definitely dustier, especially on the lip portion here, but not as dusty on the spokes or inner barrel as I thought it would be. Again, compared to the OEM pads around the same distance, I feel the OEM pads would have a deeper color where the dust collects on the spokes and the inner barrel, as well as the lip, but not as much here. This is dusty for sure, but nothing that I would say is unmanageable in terms of cleaning up. Here's a comparison of the OEM pads versus the EBC pads on the rears. The OEM pads on the left have just a little bit more than 200 miles, I would say, but you can see that it's way darker in the areas where dust is collecting, like I said earlier. Also on the spokes and face of the wheel, and definitely the inner barrel, you can see on the EBC pads that it still gets dusty, but it doesn't produce as much as the OEM pads. Again, the OEM pads had probably a little bit more than 200 miles, so take that into account. But I still feel the EBC pads definitely produce less dust on the rears. Here again, the fronts have a deeper color of dust on the OEM pads. Now the EBC pads do have a little bit more dust than the rears here, but in the front comparison, I would say less dust versus OEM. Now again, these shots of the front, I don't have the accurate mileage for the OEM pads, so I apologize there. But just by going off of how dust collects on the OEM versus EBC pads, the EBC pads so far haven't had as deep of a dust coloring in the areas where dust collection is heavy, if that makes sense.
There's still dust, don't get me wrong. They're low dust, but it doesn't mean that there's no dust with these pads. But the EBC brakes do say that through usage, over time, the dust will be less and less. But I would say that these are less dust heavy so far than the OEM brakes. Now, in terms of performance, I think these are good for the street. They're comparable to the OEM ones. The initial bite is great, normal everyday use, and haven't had to kind of slam on the brakes, so maybe I'll go test that out. But the pedal feel or brake feel is comparable to OEM on the street. Now the Red Stuff, these are not for racetrack use, so I definitely don't recommend running these on the track. Next time I go on track, I will probably put the stock OEM pads back in because there was still like a lot of pad left. Pretty low mile. This is more of my weekend car. I have another car for like the family that's much bigger. Fitting 2 kids in the back is a little bit of a struggle, but it works when we do use it. Maybe I'll do a community tab update on the usage as time goes by, but I would recommend it if you're looking to replace your pads and need some pad replacement and want to try these out. I'll drop a link in the description where you can get these pads, and so far they look to be or feel to be more maintainable. Not that the other ones weren't, but maintaining in the sense that I can use a waterless wax, the only car wash a few miles down the road, but just finding the time if I can just do these at night and maintain them like I've been doing. It's a little bit easier, if I feel lazy and miss a week or something, that they won't be as heavy as the OEM pads. And so far so good. The dust level is where I'd like it at. That doesn't mean that there's no dust. There is going to be dust, but I'll see over time, hopefully, that it starts to kind of be less and less. But yeah, hopefully you found this video informative. Shout out to buybrakes.com and EBC. Who knows, maybe I'll look to try their yellow stuff. I'll keep you guys updated. Like I said, follow me on Instagram. I like to post stories and updates there, as well as the YouTube community tab. Yeah, I know it was a pretty long video for just, you know, some brake pads, but part of it was vlogging and installing the brakes themselves and figuring that out. Maybe do some research on YouTube if mine is not as informative as it could be or should be. There's probably better instructions out there. So hope you like that video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace.